Hello there, listeners. It's Laura Yarbrough-Lloyd, your host of A Flair for VIP Events, here with an episode in the Iconic Events Series, where we explore the world of truly unforgettable, bold, and iconic events and the people who bring them to life. Really excited to have my friend and amazing events pro, Gabby Robuccio, on today's episode. Gabby has been in the events industry for over a decade. Her professional journey has included projects of varying scopes within the event industry, from production management at ESPN on some of their top global projects to organizing high-stakes fundraising events for a nonprofit healthcare foundation spanning multiple states. She is now the founder of ProEventTips, which is focused on providing events pros of all levels with the tools and training to develop crucial event-specific relationship management and leadership skills. In this episode, we're diving into the world of sports and one of the most iconic sports events of all time. So get ready for some amazing advice and a sneak peek behind the curtain of what it's like to work at the World Cup. Really excited to get Gabby on this episode. Welcome to the Iconic Events Series, a special segment of A Flair for VIP Events. I'm Laura Yarbrough-Lloyd, and in this series, I sit down with event professionals from rising talent to industry leaders who've worked behind the scenes at some of the world's most iconic events, like global sporting events and red carpet premieres. You'll hear firsthand what it's like to work at these events, the career moves that got them there, and the insider lessons you won't find anywhere else. Whether you're just starting out or leveling up your event career, this series will help you step into your iconic events era. Okay, Gabby, I'm super excited to have you here on the Iconic Events Series. And I speak to you nearly every day, so I know a lot about you. But why don't you give everyone a self-introduction? Tell us a little bit about you.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm super excited to be here. I've been looking forward to this. So I have worked in events for 12-ish years, and I was very fortunate. I started my career right out of college at ESPN. So I kind of got into events accidentally, where I was working at ESPN and I saw an opportunity to manage productions. And I was like, oh, I'm good at organizing vacations and stuff for people. So I threw my hat in the ring. And I was fortunate enough to get the job. And my first ever event that I worked on was the 2014 World Cup in Brazil for 8 weeks, working for ESPN on their production side. So I did that for about 10 years. I did all of the major soccer tournaments. So the UEFA Euros, all of the big MLS games, all of the US men's qualifying. And then I also did some Special Olympics World Games stuff. So I've been out of the iconic world for 6 or 7 years now, but it was a huge part of my career. It kind of shaped the way that I work in events, if you think about it.
I have to ask, do you like soccer or sport?
I did. I actually played soccer all growing up and all throughout high school, and my family was really big on the Italian national team. Couldn't get that from my name. So we used to watch World Cup every single year, and I would watch it with my friends. So when I got assigned to that sport totally randomly, I was ecstatic. Not only was I getting to work on a sport that I knew a lot about, but it took me all over the world. It's like one of the very few sports at ESPN where you travel abroad. So I got to go to Brazil. I got to go to Geneva. I got to go to Paris for 6 weeks. I was very, very fortunate, especially because I liked soccer.
That's amazing. It was meant to be. I feel like a lot of people who go into sports events are actually huge fans of the sports themselves. Although me, side note, I work at a lot of tennis events and I knew nothing about tennis before I got those jobs. I'm a fan now, but prior to that, not at all.
Sometimes I think that helps because my favorite sport of all time is baseball. And I think that had I been assigned to MLB as my sport at ESPN, I probably would have hated it. So I like the fact that it wasn't my all-time favorite because I got to learn more about soccer and about the international programs. I didn't come in thinking I knew everything. So that's probably had something to do with why tennis ended up being your favorite. Plus, tennis is so fun.
It is super fun. I'm actually a golfer, but if anybody wanted me to work at a golf event, I would pause for a moment. I would say yes, but part of me is like, do I actually want to do that and kind of mix the personal with the work? Although now I feel like they're one and the same. But
That's what happens in events. Yep.
I know, exactly. So, okay, you traveled a lot of places, and we're going to talk more about your specific roles at these events later. What was your favorite place that you traveled to?
Ooh, that is a very good question. I mean, I hadn't really seen much outside of the United States. I mean, I'd been to Italy a couple of times, but that was, and London, because I love London, but that was pretty much it. So going to Brazil was pretty cool. Honestly, I'm going to say this with a caveat, is that everywhere I went for work, I was spoiled rotten. I mean, ESPN was paying for my hotel. I had security everywhere I went. So I got like the exclusive, not your typical experiences. I loved Brazil, but I have to say Paris. Oh, that's so cliche, but I had wanted to go to Paris my entire life. And then I got to do like 5 different site surveys over there. And then I lived over there for 6 weeks, like in Saint Germain. And I just got to like walk around and pretend I lived in Paris for a while. That had to have been my favorite. It has to. So cliche.
I love that. Well, you know what? The first event that I really worked on was the 2012 Olympics in London. And I said, oh yeah, I lived in London for, what was it? I don't know, 6 weeks or something. And then what do I know? I'm like back, not quite in London, but I'm always in London, and I live in the UK. And I still say it was my favorite place. So
see, you manifested that for yourself. That's something that happens with iconic events. Yeah. I'm telling you.
Yes, full circle for sure. Mm-hmm. And now I do iconic events in London. So I made it happen. Awesome. That's what I like to say. Okay, so are there any events that you would love to talk about on this episode? You've worked a lot of soccer events. Which ones?
So I think just for this purpose, because my experience with iconic events is very different than yours and kind of the typical route, because I did it for a corporation and not really for freelance. But I think I have to talk about the World Cup. I mean, the World Cup is just World Cup and Euros. Those 2 experiences are something that not many people get to experience, and they kind of changed my life. And then I also worked on the Special Olympics World Games, which is a completely different type of iconic event. It's not really as big or well known, but it was also really impactful. But we can stick with the major soccer ones because those are just so cool, so fun to talk about.
So iconic.
Yes. I mean, worldwide too, not just, I worked on the NFL draft, but people over there don't care about that. Let's talk about
Exactly. There's a lot of different kinds of iconic events, and some are more like, I think the NFL draft is amazing, but maybe people in Europe wouldn't know what that is. Maybe they would. It's growing in popularity. But okay, I really want to know, what was your role when you worked at ESPN and you went to these events?
It was, so I describe myself as air traffic control, which I think all event coordinators and planners do. But specifically what I did was I worked on any live production for soccer. So anytime ESPN was live on site somewhere for a soccer event, whether it was the World Cup, MLS, Confederations Cup, I worked on all the logistics. So like, I didn't touch the content. They wouldn't ever let me be on air or what they talk about on air. I curse way too much, but I did all the logistics. So I was in all the production meetings. I was hiring the freelance staff. I was managing all of the talent, managing their hotels, their contracts, all that, their payments, all that stuff. And when we went abroad, I was in charge of all the hotels, all the visas, and then I did all the transportation, all the catering, all that stuff. So I kind of managed all of the logistics for the whole team that went on site, both operations and production. And I didn't do it all myself. Good Lord. I worked with all the different departments at ESPN. So that's what makes my job a little different. Is like, I managed the transportation schedule, but I worked with ESPN security to do that. I managed the budget, but I did what ESPN finance told me to do. most of the time. So like I got to work with the internal departments, but I was kind of the information hub. So at every meeting, the coordinating producer or executive director, whatever, would look to me and say, give updates on visas, hotels, food, because people care way more about where they're sleeping and where they're eating than what they're going to talk about, which is very funny. But
100%.
that was kind of what I did. So I was like the information hub of that. I had to do all the legal stuff as far as, working with all the credentialing. So I was the like main liaison with FIFA or UEFA to make sure all of our crews got credentialed at any stadium, but people would come to me to get that information. So I did a lot of organizing and dispersing, which
That's really
events,
cool.
right?
How many people from ESPN would travel to a single event? Because I like to give an idea to people of the scale of this.
So when I worked in MLS game, I had my hotel block was usually 80 people, and that was, production and operations. But for the World Cup, there were 3 of us on the production management team, and we had 300 people that we were responsible for, because we had to basically bring the entire studio crew to Brazil, and then we had teams traveling to call the games throughout the country. So I was in charge of visas and hotels for 300 people. That was my first. Every time I think about it, I laugh. Yeah, so about 300 people for the big events, and then, as small as 150 to 100 for some of the smaller ones. Like MLS Cup was always 200.
That's amazing. So when you were on site, after all those things had already been arranged, what does a typical day look like?
Ooh, I was the schedule guru. Anybody who works in events, so anybody listening to this will understand. I essentially went to work with my to-do list was always this small, because I was like, okay, I need to get out daily schedules, talent schedules, coordinate meals, whatever. And then the rest of the day was put out fires. So my job was, if something went wrong, someone couldn't get in with their credential, or a flight was delayed or something like that, I was at my desk in our makeshift office on Copacabana Beach, locked to my chair for like 16 hours a day, just waiting for someone to have an issue. And then it was, Gabby, this flight didn't take off. Ian Dark can't get to Sao Paulo on time, and that was essentially what my days were. So I started off and ended the day with schedules, making sure everyone was where they needed to be. And then in between, I was whatever happened, I had to deal with every day, which was a lot.
Cool job. Like, what was your first job? And most people can't say that theirs comes anywhere near that. That's so
sitting
cool.
on Copacabana Beach trying to get Ian Dark on a plane, which, God, I love that man, but I don't know how he keeps his head on.
So where did you work? I guess it would have been stadiums and, the large scale event venues, or were you based in hotels or anything like that?
That's a great question. So for me, it's a little different, I think, than you. So for MLS, like when I worked MLS Cup, those bigger games, or any of the US men's national team games, our studio set would be on site. So like we would have a desk that we built up in the rafters, and that's where Alexi Lawless and Taylor Twellman would, do their studio show for the game. I was based in the loading dock. So everyone's like, oh, you get to travel. I'm like, yeah, I see a lot of concrete. I would be down in the loading dock because I would be close enough to run up if someone up in the studio needed me, or the production truck. So for those, I was there. For something like the World Cup or the UEFA Euros, because there are so many different stadiums where the games are, we built a hub. So we built a massive office studio complex, like right on the banks of the Seine, or right on the end of Copacabana Beach. We bought out one of like the clubs that are there and built a studio and an office there. And that's where I'm based for the bigger events. So, kind of the central place. I couldn't go to all the stadiums for the bigger events.
I love the scale of these events. I like, it's not only the thrill of it, but just looking at the work that goes into it, and how they'll move and transplant an entire office or organization to another country and basically build everything, it's made for purpose. I find that so amazing from a logistics viewpoint, that's part of the thrill for me. So it's not just, there's a lot of perks when you're at an event like that. So I do have to ask, did you get to watch any Do you have any like fun stories of things that you did when you were there, or was it really just at your desk in the
Well,
loading
I mean,
dock?
I worked for the most amazing woman on the planet who was her demeanor and mentality about making sure that people who were away from their home for 8 months felt at home, comfortable, had the time to disengage. I was very fortunate. So most of the time was at the desk, but there was one day where, I mean, I'm name dropping a lot, but that's one of the perks. I'm allowed to do that. Where Ruud van Nistelrooy came up to me and was like, "Hey, my wife can't go to the Spain Chile game at Maracanã in Brazil. Do you want to go today?" And I was like, "Yes, absolutely." So like, I got to watch a World Cup game in Maracanã Stadium in Rio totally unexpectedly. So like that is something that's going to be seared into my brain forever. In Paris, it was in the office mostly because there wasn't stadiums that were close enough for me to go, but the office was literally on the banks of the Seine, like down the stairs right where the water is. So I'm like, can't really complain about sitting in that office all day, you know? And I got to sit in the office and watch World Cup games with some of the most amazing soccer talent in the entire world. Like I got to sit on a green room couch because I was doing their schedules or their makeup schedules or whatever and watch the games with them. I was like, that's worth the stress right there. Like
I
that
know
was just
exactly what
pretty
you
cool.
mean. Like I do events and I think, well, I haven't seen the sunlight in about 12 hours, but I'm in the office with some really big names,
All
like maybe they're
perspective.
commentators or they're just doing various things with the event. And sometimes I just can't believe it's real. And
Like
I
you don't
think,
see the sunlight, but then you're sitting in the background of a picture with the friggin' princess. Like it's, and you weren't in that picture, you in the background, but how many people get to say
yeah,
that? Like that's pretty cool.
I know. I like that's one of my most prized photos, and I'm not even in the foreground. I'm just in the background, but
But
who
you know
knows?
it's you. You can tell it's you. Like those are the perks. So people think it's that, oh, I'm gallivanting around Rio. I saw almost no Rio except for walking to and from work,
Mhm.
but I get to go to America now one day.
That's
Like it's
amazing.
there. It's all about perspective there. And if I didn't like soccer, maybe it wouldn't have meant as much to me. But I don't know. I think I was very fortunate.
For sure. And even if you didn't like soccer, you would have because it's
It's hard
hard
not
not
to.
to buy into something that's that iconic. So I have to know if you worked with freelancers. Let's say a freelancer wanted to get involved with something like the World Cup or any other major event through something like ESPN. It doesn't have to be ESPN specifically. What does that look like in your eyes?
So, the way that I know how to get people involved in major sporting events is more on the TV and production side. So, like, you are the expert on the hospitality, the VIP, that side of it. I bet you if we sat here, not on the podcast, and exchanged names, you've worked with some of my counterparts on tennis. Because we worked with VIP and hospitalities. If you want to be involved in the way that I was, it's getting a job with a broadcasting network. So like if you want to work on the Super Bowl, you have to work at the station that is broadcasting that Super Bowl. Or a lot of the freelancers that I hired, which Olympics is coming up, are locals. So I manage all of the logistics, but I'm sitting in Brazil. If I didn't have local event production or event planners or event managers, I wouldn't have survived. I wouldn't have known what any of the food I was getting people were, if we needed to get medicate, anything like that. So ESPN and other broadcasting networks are constantly looking for local event planners, event managers, and we sometimes runners, sometimes event managers, but we hire them and we rely on them. They become part of our team, almost as if they are working for ESPN. They get the credentials, they get the office space, everything. We had one gentleman named Fred Danvin in Paris, and he saved our entire life. Like we had some epic issues with building our set and the Seine and flooding and all that. And if we hadn't had a local person, we wouldn't have survived. So like if you don't want to work full time for a broadcasting network, look for opportunities for them to be hiring local production managers or local event planners and managers, because then you get the best of both worlds. You're in the office, but you're not in a full-time job. So it just depends on how you want to go about it. But we rely on local hires quite a bit.
Totally agree. I know you mentioned the Olympics. I know at the Olympics, there will be organizations out there that will hire people remotely, and then they'll have a whole separate local team that they advertise for. Saying that, I always tell people, don't let where you live be a narrative, because a lot of people are like, I don't live in a big city. I don't live in London or New York or wherever the big events are happening. But, there are, like I said, there's two totally separate teams and they'll hire both. So I always like to, tell people, don't let it be a narrative if you don't live in the big cities or where it's happening.
We brought people up from, when I say local, I mean from France. Like, we flew people up
Yeah.
from the south of France to work with us in Paris because I can't drive.
Yeah,
I can't drive, and like, I minored in French, but I can order very basic things, for a restaurant or a grocery store. So like, anyone in France, that spoke the language or could drive, makeup artists that were locals, local meaning in the country. I'm talking more globally here, but
local international scale means you're in the country.
very different. Yeah.
And I'd say almost the same is true in the US, but you can fly anywhere these days. I think that like every major event that I've done, I've never lived in the location. I'm
That's
fortunate,
cool.
a couple hours from London, but yeah, I've never lived in the location. I've flown to New York, to Berlin, to London, and so on. So I love just that concept that local does not actually mean you're in the same city.
I mean, ESPN is based, the headquarters are in literally a town called Bristol, Connecticut, where if you're driving through, it's like, welcome to Bristol. Look, it's ESPN. You're out of Bristol. So it's like, I lived in Connecticut. So I never lived anywhere that these events were, but that's because that's where the home base was. And then I worked events all over the country, all over the world. But yeah, you're absolutely right. Local on a global scale means something very, very different.
Yeah. Okay, now you've piqued my curiosity. We've actually never spoken of this. I used to live in Connecticut.
No way. Where?
Around New Haven.
Yeah, I was at Bristol, so I was central, middle of nowhere, Connecticut. Oh, that's so funny.
I actually did know that ESPN was in Connecticut. That was back from my pharmaceutical days.
Wow, you've lived so many lives.
I've lived a lot of lives.
So cool.
I actually got that job because of the London Olympics, and I was doing client services, and one of the guests owned a pharmaceutical company, and I just happened to be interesting at the time. I had been in China for a year, had a science background, but wow, I can go off on a tangent on my other lives.
You worked at one epic event and it turned into a potential career in a completely different industry. That is really cool.
Yes, so you can go the other way around, That's actually a really good point. It did take me to China, where I was I went back 2013 to the end of 2019, and I moved from pharmaceuticals back to events, but I think it was all because of the most iconic event in the world, which is the Olympics in 2012.
That's cool. And all those opportunities just came from you being kick-ass at your job at one event. And then you've lived 17 different lives because of that one event.
I have lived 17 lives.
And I went from working at ESPN and living in Brazil and Paris to living in Utah and working for managing a team of event planners for a healthcare foundation. So fundraising events. Because we have that event experience, no matter what side of the event we work on, it can translate to almost anything. Definitely. Literally almost anything.
Yeah, and I actually like, pointing out that, some people who listen to this will want to go into iconic events, and then some people will be in iconic events and then they just want to slow down, maybe they don't want to travel. Yeah, you're pointing at yourself. I feel you, even me. I'm being very selective with where I travel these days. I don't want to be gone that often. And so, yeah, you can go the other way around. I think that one iconic event is the biggest portfolio boost, the biggest like boost to your resume and the people that you know. So I'm all for it. I mean, iconic is, I should just probably get it. Like if I had a tattoo, it'd probably be like
Do
the
that.
word iconic. I don't have tattoos. I'm too
You're,
scared for that, but if
I
I
got like
did.
6 at the same time. Don't do it. But I totally agree with you, because having it on your resume, and sounds a lot more braggadocious. I made up that word, than it really is. But like, because I have that experience and I have it on my resume and I have all those connections, if I wanted to do another iconic event or go back into that, I know the way into it. I know the connections. I would need help from a coach, cough, cough, to get back into that world. But like, I could do it because I have that experience. So it's almost like getting there, doing it, getting it on your resume, even if it's not for you at that time, you want to get married and have kids, and then you want to go back to it, it's always going to be an option, which is what I think is just so cool, because people see World Cup on my resume even 10 years later, and it's like a showstopper, even though it was 10 years ago. It's pretty cool.
Speaking of a showstopper, I can see your video, and I've always seen this. You do have an Emmy behind you.
I
You
do.
have to tell me about it.
That is my sports Emmy. I know, I'm not very subtle, but like, this is my one thing I can brag about, so I keep it here. That actually, so the sports Emmys are kind of like daytime Emmys, like, for General Hospital or whatever, but for their sports productions. So I unfortunately never won one for any of my soccer events, because World Cups and Euros are always in an Olympics year, and we're never going to beat the Olympics, because the Olympics are incredible and what they do is absolutely amazing. So, but I did one season on College Game Day for college football, which was, I mean, you've heard all the events I've worked on. A season of College Game Day was single-handedly the hardest thing I've ever done in my life, the hardest event planning I've ever done. I learned more from that than anything else. But yeah, College Game Day won Outstanding Studio Show that year, and because I was production manager, I was eligible for one. So when this showed up in the mail, I was like, what the heck?
That's
Pretty cool.
amazing.
I know. It's very heavy, so I just keep it on the shelf. It could be used as a weapon if needed, but it really is just there to remind me that I've done some pretty cool stuff.
College Game Day is a lifestyle. I mean, I'm a huge college football fan. I don't care about the NFL. I mean, I would say that I would work at NFL events, but watching it, I could pass, I could watch it, but college football is the best.
Like, anywhere in the South, you have to love college football. That's
Oh my
like in
gosh.
your DNA.
I mean,
My
Arkansas are mine. Love it.
Pig
Football.
Suey. I loved working with Arkansas. I loved working with that team. But yeah, anyway, so that's my one prize possession.
That's super cool. I mean, I can't envision ever winning an Emmy for any of the events I work on because I don't do the production, but you're making me want to try.
And
They even said like you can find ways into events by looking up who wins the Emmy Awards for things like award shows and the sports Emmys. That's another good point, and it gives you names.
It's pretty cool. And there's just so many different aspects of it. Like, I'm thinking about it now, and there are people who graduate with a finance degree and then end up working on finance or budget for a World Cup. Like, there's just so many different ways to get into these type of iconic events that I don't think people realize that it's out there, which is why I love that you're making it like known, because it changes people's lives, and it is hard. It's a lot of work, a lot of networking, a lot of time, but it's totally doable. Totally doable.
Totally doable. Any experience level, because yours was what, like right after college, or
yeah. I started at ESPN working in like the tape record room just to get my foot in the door, because I ESPN was my dream job. I'm so fortunate. I would watch it growing up. That's what I wanted to do. Again, I wanted to be on air, which is embarrassing, but I curse way too much. So I just got my foot in the door. And then as soon as I was there, found that this job existed. And it was literally my first like real big job out of college. I'm very, very lucky though.
That's so cool. You know what? I have often wondered, why am I so fascinated with iconic events? When I was younger, I would pretend to be famous. I was a famous singer.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the Britney Spears days. I was a famous gymnast because, you know, it was the, oh, what do they call the dream team? The girls, the women's gymnastics team who won the Olympics.
Yeah, yeah.
Carrie Strug. I just like wanted to be them. And I'm clearly not famous. I'm not on stage. I'm not selling out concerts, but I still get to go to the same thing.
You're in the room.
That's right.
You're in the room, and your skills that you've taken a lot of time to develop them, and I know that, but like these skills that you've honed in on, your superpowers, like you're using them to get into those rooms that you always wanted to be in. It just, we don't know when we're 9 that you can be a tour manager or you can be a production manager for a fashion show. We just see the people walking or designing the clothes. So it's like you found a way to use your superpowers and get into those rooms. And I feel like that's something that a lot of people are going to start listening to you and be like, oh, hey, I didn't realize that. Like, no, I've never sewed a dress, but maybe I can work at Fashion Week. That's pretty cool.
It's usually like a childhood dream. And when you realize that, it's actually quite powerful. I had to like take a few steps back and ask myself, why does this mean so much to me? Yeah, definitely. Well, I hope everyone listening actually asks themselves that. If you want to work at iconic events, why? Answer that and ask yourself why again, and then ask yourself why to that, and just back up.
Do it 5 times.
It's like coming from your childhood.
Ask why 5 times and you'll get to the root of it. And then it's like that, then that's the iconic event that I probably want to start with then. Or it gives you an industry to look into, which I know siloing in the industry is something else we could talk about, or in the industries we could talk about for hours, but like maybe that's where you start. Get your foot in the door. There are just so many opportunities people don't know about.
So if you had to sum everything up, let's say, can you give one lesson that you've learned from these iconic events you've worked at, and 1 or 2 tips for people to work at them?
Lesson. So I think the biggest lesson that I learned when I was working the iconic events at ESPN is, this sounds so cliche and I don't care. You have to be adaptable. If you want to work in iconic events, because most of the iconic events are live and you're in it as they're happening, I had to learn to be flexible and adaptable. Like that number one lesson is that when you work in an event like this or like these or any of this industry, things are not going to go according to plan. Remember how I said I had a to-do list this long and then I would just sit there and wait? That I had to teach myself. When I first started, I had like every minute of my day planned out. Nope. When you do these types of events, you have to be adaptable, which I think if you're in events, that applies to you no matter what, but especially in the nature of these. Like I know at tennis, you've had to pivot on site quite a few times last minute, which is, number one skill. And then tips. Yes. And then tips, you just gave the best tip. Like, I don't know how to top that. Ask yourself why. Do that 5 whys. Ask why 5 times and get to the root of it. And then start asking questions. Start looking on LinkedIn. And you don't just have to look at fashion designer. Like look at venue manager at Lincoln Square. Start doing the research, get some names and put yourself out there. Not easy to do, but it can really change your life. And also get a coach. No, just kidding. But that's my number one tip is ask why this is something you want and try and figure out where you want to start. Cause it can be overwhelming if you don't, this is where I want to try first. And then just start meeting people. Don't be afraid to talk to people and ask questions ever.
Such good advice. Honestly, I wish that I'd been better at talking to people 10 years ago. I'm super shy. I've got a podcast.
I know. I was like, says the girl with the
really shy. I'm super shy, so I've had to teach myself to talk to people. And yeah, if you can just develop that skill early on, I think that's really good. They don't even have to work at an event that you want to work at. It's just talking to people because they might know someone who will.
I still have a lot of connections at ESPN. I don't have any sway, but like, you look at my LinkedIn profile, I do not work in Iconic Events right now at all, but I did. So I'm, people who have done it can always offer insight, maybe even throw out names or where to look for names. So it's like, don't be afraid to ask questions. Don't be afraid to look like you don't know something, because that's the only way you're ever going to learn.
For sure.
Ask.
And then one day your portfolio will be so strong you don't even have to like send a document. Just send a picture of your Emmy Award.
Literally, of just me holding it, or a picture of you with the princess. You're not even in the foreground, but that you could use that. Yeah,
it's actually in my portfolio.
I know it is, and it's perfect that it's in there because it's like, yeah, it's eye catching.
Like,
but
no
that's
one
what
is
you can
surprised.
get to. Yeah.
Oh, such a good chat about iconic events. Let's round this out. Tell people where to find you now.
So you can find me on LinkedIn. I'm always happy to answer questions about iconic events in my experience. Clearly, I'm not shy. I do love talking. So LinkedIn under Gabriella Robuccio, or I'm on Instagram as ProEventTips, and seriously, reach out anytime if anyone has any questions. I'm always happy to talk.
Amazing. And what is ProEventTips?
Well, you're teeing me up. So ProEventTips is what I do now. So I actually left corporate events at the beginning of this year and started my own project where I am working with event professionals of all levels and all different industries to kind of develop the skills and tools to balance stakeholder relationships. So relationship management is something that if I had the skills or the knowledge back in 2014 when I did the World Cup, I would have made far fewer mistakes and burnt myself out a lot less. So I'm taking all of my oh shit moments and everything I've learned, and I'm helping other event professionals so they don't have to learn those lessons the hard way.
Amazing. We should collaborate on that.
100%. Anytime.
To the iconic event pros out there. Okay. Amazing conversation. Can't wait to have people listen, and I know they're going to provide feedback. So thank you, Gabby. This has been so much fun. I know we could talk about iconic events all day, every day, and we probably will as soon as we stop recording this, and again tomorrow. So
yeah. But thank you for having me on. I love being able to talk about this, even though it's part of my former life, if you will. It's a huge part of my life. So I was excited to come on here, and of course to chat with you.
I know, it's just like two friends talking. So that's been really fun. Hope other people had fun as well. All right. So thank you so much. I am signing off on this episode of the Iconic Events Series with Gabby. Thank you. That's a wrap on this episode in the Iconic Events series, and a huge thank you to Gabby for joining and sharing her incredible insights about working at events like the World Cup. If you loved today's episode, please leave a review, like, follow, and share this episode with other event pros who dream of working at iconic events. Don't forget to connect with Gabby. All of her details are in the notes. And stay tuned because I've got more amazing guests lined up where we talk about the world of iconic events. Connect with me on Instagram at Laura Lloyd Events and A Flair for VIP Events, and on LinkedIn, I'm the only Laura Yarbrough Lloyd. I'll see you next time when you undoubtedly will have a little bit more flair for VIP events, and you're going to enter your iconic events era. Thank you so much for listening, and I'll see you next time.